Today, I'm going to talk about some unexpected things that I encountered on my thru hikes and lashes. Hi, my name is Julianne, also known as Roadrunner. I'm a long distance trail thru hiker. So this video is slightly different because I'm essentially just talking about some encounters that I had that were surprising to me, or things that happened that were surprising to me. And it's not to make anybody feel bad. It is to kind of learn from those surprises. The first thing that I encountered happened on a shakedown hike that I did in the Smoky Mountains in 2024. Now that was during the time of thru hikers coming through the Smoky Mountains as well. So we were actually near thru hikers during that shakedown section hike. And the thing that I encountered was that thru hikers were not understanding the Smoky Mountain permit process, meaning, yeah, they got themselves a thru hiker permit, but it appeared as such. They didn't read what that meant and were surprised when they actually were faced with exactly the scenario that the Smoky Mountain National Park tells you may encounter. If you don't know, the Smoky Mountain National Park has a thru hiker permit that allows you to hike through the Smoky Mountain National Park, but there are some requirements when you do that. The first thing is that you have to hike through it within a certain amount of time, but most importantly, you are required to camp at shelter areas. Now, you're supposed to camp inside the shelter. That is the first requirement. Now, if there are too many hikers or too many people wanting to camp, you are allowed to set up your tent near the shelter, but you are not allowed to do something called dispersed camping, which is just, camp anywhere in the SMNP. Now, one of the biggest and most frustrating things that the park has, there is also a section hiker permit. And the section hiker permit requires the people who do this as a section to fill out where they will be camping each night. Now, a thru hiker permit doesn't have to have that because we're thru hiking, we don't really know exactly where we're gonna be camping. And I feel like section hikers don't really know either, but anyway, the section hikers are required to predetermine where they're going to be camping each night. And so essentially they're making a reservation for that shelter. Now, a section hiker has the right of way. What does that mean? So I hope I'm gonna make this really understandable. So let's say you as a thru hiker get to a shelter and there are like 3 other thru hikers there before you. You set up your sleep system because you are required to sleep inside of the shelter. And so you get there, you set it up, other hikers come in, other thru hikers, and it's getting full. Let's say some section hikers will show up at around 9 p.m. that night. This now means that the last thru hiker that came into the shelter has to remove their stuff, has to get out of the shelter because the section hiker had a reservation for the shelter. So now the thru hiker has to pick up all of their stuff and then set up their camp or their tent essentially in the middle of the night. And this rule has been one of those rules that people really, really hate and dislike because it doesn't really make sense, or it's not really fair. I mean, I guess it makes sense because the section hiker has that spot reserved, but it's not really fair to the thru hiker who got there in time to set up their stuff and now have to move all of their belongings. A lot of thru hikers would prefer to be in their tent anyway, so the fact that we kind of are required to set up our sleep system inside the shelter if it's not full yet, but then have to move out once a section hiker appears is very frustrating because most thru hikers would want to set up their tent anyway, but we're not really allowed to do that, okay? And so what I had encountered on that shakedown hike was we got there, the shelter seemed full to us, so we set up our camp spot and it just was like there was a bunch of hikers in there, so it looked full. We're just setting it up. We didn't even ask, right? Anyway, as we're setting up our tents, we hear commotion in the shelter. Like there is some yelling going on. And eventually this disgruntled thru hiker comes out and he's angry that he had to get out of the shelter because a bunch of section hikers showed up. It was like 4 or 5 people, and they were like, we've got a reservation, you need to get out. Now that was not during nighttime, so it wasn't like that big of a problem there. However, this thru hiker was so upset. And I can understand that he was upset. However, he didn't know the rule. In fact, I asked him, hey, were you like the last thru hiker into that shelter? And he goes, no, I was the first. And I was like, then you were not supposed to get out of the shelter. The last thru hiker or the last few thru hikers are supposed to get out when those section hikers come in, not the very first one that shows up. So that was the first encounter that really made me aware. I mean, people don't really know the whole process. They don't read everything. They think it's, first come, first serve. That just doesn't work like that in the Smoky Mountains. It's really annoying. It is a very frustrating process. I always thought what would make the most sense for there to be like, you must be checking in to the shelter by 5 p.m., let's say, or 6 p.m., let's make it even that. And if you check in after 6 p.m., you no longer have the right of way of the shelter. I think that would make a lot more sense, so that thru hikers or any kind of hiker doesn't have to get out of the shelter in the middle of the night, especially when it's freezing cold. It's just a really, really horrible rule. And I think just applying a check-in time would probably resolve that. So that was the first scenario that I came across, that I realized people don't know the Smoky Mountain rules, and you really should know the Smoky Mountain rules when you are thru hiking, because it's very important. The next thing that I encountered was actually on the same section hike as well as on my lash this year in 2025. And it was the exact same evening where the hiker came out of the shelter all disgruntled. He brought another one that he was hiking with, and that lady had a Z-Pax duplex. And as she was trying to set up the duplex, I noticed she did not know how to do it. Now, this was a thru hiker. And so she was fumbling and moving, and I was like, okay, what? This is like, we're in the Smokies. We're like almost 200 miles into their hike. I'm like, okay, let me help her, first of all. So I'm like, hey, would you like to have some help setting up your duplex tent? She's like, yes, absolutely. I have not once set up my tent because I have been staying in the shelters this entire time. And so that's something that I've encountered also this year. There was another lady also in the Smoky Mountains, and she set up her Z-Pax duplex right next to me, and she also didn't know how to really set it up the right way. She had a little bit better idea, but it was just like it was rough for her. So once again, I'm like, hey, would you like help setting up the tent? So she's like, yes. So this is something that I've encountered, like people who are attempting a thru hike. So I'm not talking about day hikers, section hikers, like thru hikers who hike for the first 200 miles because they're allowed to, or they have enough room like in a shelter, and then they get to the Smoky Mountains and they're being sent out of the shelters because the section hikers are coming through, and now they need to set up their tents and they have no idea how to set up their tents. And I feel like as a thru hiker or attempting thru hiker, I don't know if this sounds judgmental, but I feel like if you're planning to hike 2,200 miles and you have a tent with you, you should probably know how to set up that tent. I mean, is that like too judgmental of me? I feel like you should at least know how to set it up, because what if you are in a scenario where it's like dangerously cold, or there's a storm, or you really need to set up your shelter really quickly and you have zero knowledge how to set it up. And again, this happened in the Smoky Mountains, which makes it extra urgent that you should know how to set up your tent before you go on a thru hike. So I highly encourage you to just set up your tent in your backyard, even if it's snowing. Don't use that as an excuse. And set it up more than once. Become very familiar with your tent, because this could be a life or death scenario. I really mean it. Like, a shelter is so important for you, and not knowing how to set up your tent while you're hiking the Smoky Mountains, that'd be really, really, really rough. So, and because it was a more than once occasion that I noticed, I really wanted to tell you guys to please make sure you know how to set up your tent before you go into the Smoky Mountains, especially. I mean, the entire thru hike, but especially the Smoky Mountains. And I'm realizing that all the things that I've encountered really have to do with unprepared hikers, because the next situation that I encountered was not all the way up to the Smokies. It was just going into North Carolina. It was the first shelter that did not have a bear box. A bear box is a place near the shelter where you can put your food in, and it's protected from the bears and other critters. But once you get into North Carolina, most shelters don't offer a bear box, so now the hikers are required to hang their food in the trees, meaning you have to know a bear hang, and there are a few different ways to do so, one with an AT bear hang and one with a PCT bear hang. The funniest thing, and that's just a side note, which I thought was really funny, is that the AT this year in 2025 recommended and suggested that hikers do a PCT hang and not an AT hang. And I was told, now this is not me experiencing this personally, this is just word of mouth, so I don't know if it really happened, but I was told by another hiker when they did that Amicalola introduction where, you know, they make you watch a video and then there's a ranger or an employee of Amicalola. They were told to do the PCT hang, and when they asked them, hey, can you show us how to do a PCT hang? The person, the employee, ranger or Amicalola employee, did not know how to do a PCT hang. So it's kind of funny that you're requiring the hikers to do a PCT hang, but you don't really know how to do it yourself. So that's just a little side note that I found a little bit interesting. If you're requiring the hikers to do a PCT bear hang, and you're requiring the hikers to do a little introduction video before they get their hang tags, maybe it would be helpful to show the hikers how to do a PCT bear hang. Anyway, so what happened was, because there are all these bear canister or bear boxes in Georgia, Georgia is a great place to camp because you have the shelters, the bear boxes, or cables. You have bear hang cables that they prepare already for you. But now you get to North Carolina, that's no longer the case. And I remember the first day into North Carolina, I was like standing Indian campsite or something. You know, I'm showing a bunch of hikers how to do the PCT bear hang, but also I'm starting to hang my own bear bag, and this thru hiker again, this is a thru hiker thing. This doesn't seem to be a section hiker thing. The thru hiker looks at me, watches me do my thing. I have the rucksack in my hand, and this thru hiker, he actually thru hiked, so he's a real thru hiker, not just an attempting thru hiker. He goes, "What's that?" And I go, "That is a rucksack." He goes, "What do you put in it?" And I really was flabbergasted for just a second. First of all, it's a rucksack. You put rocks in it, just in case you're wondering. But also the fact that this attempting thru hiker at the time, now real thru hiker, did not know what to do with it. That means this hiker had absolutely no clue how to hang his bear bag. Now, he had a bear bag, which is interesting, so he knew to bring one, but he didn't know what to do with a rucksack or how to throw it. Now, it could have been he was pulling my leg, but it didn't look like he was, because he was really watching our process. And when I say our, I'm like trailing my process. And I showed them both, and he was like, "Oh, okay, that's how you do it." And once again, it's the thru hikers are being spoiled by Georgia, not having to do essentially anything. And then they get into North Carolina or the Smoky Mountains, and they have no idea what to do with the essentials, like a bear bag as well as your tent. So that's the other thing that I encountered on my thru hikes or lashes.